Hi everyone, today I'm talking about some modern popular board games. Now the reason I wanted to make this video is for the benefit of new gamers to our hobby or people just interested in getting into the hobby, because these are the games that are probably going to pop up first on your radar in terms of Google searches or having them recommended to you, and even seeing them in local kind of retail stores and board game stores. Now this hobby is pretty saturated at the moment. There's a lot of games being released all the time, and kind of understanding what games are going to suit your needs can be quite difficult. So as with most hobbies, there are kind of loads of subgenres, games that are cooperative, games for families, kind of advanced strategy games, party games, and the purpose of this list is just to have a brief talk through a lot of these games you're going to be seeing and kind of giving you a gist of what they're all about. Now these games, as I said, have reached immense popularity. They've sold hundreds of thousands, if not millions of copies. So they really have broke that glass ceiling of being a niche product and kind of reached the mainstream. So the first kind of category of games I wanted to talk about were family games. Now obviously, in terms of mass marketness, these are the games that are really going to appeal to people because people want to play them with their kids and significant others. So one of the first games that are going to pop up on your radar is Ticket to Ride. Now Ticket to Ride is quite a cool product because it kind of harks back to those classic board games that you're probably more familiar with, but it still has more modern mechanisms in them and has a more modern feel. It's a train game where you are basically collecting cards to build train routes to connect one place to another and get victory points in that way. It has this kind of rummy mechanism where you're drawing cards, collecting them and ultimately cutting people off and building routes and stuff. Very accessible, it looks nice, and again it has that kind of harking back kind of feel to it, which is going to feel somewhat familiar but still fresh at the same time. Good for kind of children of all ages and adults alike. Secondly, I'm going to talk about Dixit. Now Dixit is a game you're going to see in bookstores and stuff like that. This one is a very kind of esoteric and abstract style game where you are basically have a hand of cards with this really cool artwork on them, very kind of weird cerebral art, and you are basically paying or the person in the hot seat is going to be playing a card and giving a sentence in related to that card or a word, and then everybody else is going to also pick a secret card from their hand, and then at the end, when everybody's played a card, they're all going to vote on a certain card who they think was the player who chose it in the first place, and get points in lots of different ways. It's a very fun and quick, accessible game that I think caters for a lot of groups, and it's still fun for more advanced gamers because it has such a whimsical and kind of fun feel to it. The next one I'm going to talk about is Carcassonne. Now Carcassonne is an immensely popular tile laying game. So tile laying games are games where you don't actually start with the board, you actually build the board as you play along, and you're going to be placing different landscape tiles basically made up of fields or castles or roads, and then you're placing one of your little tokens on them and ultimately trying to get kind of big castles and big roads and score a lot of points in return. It's good for 2 players all the way up to say 5 or 6 players, and you can also kind of up the difficulty of the game if you're getting a bit worn out of the base game to add more complexity to it. So a really nice breezy game, and one again almost every board gamer has played Carcassonne, and I think in a huge majority is thought of in high regard. So Carcassonne, a great way to get into the hobby. The next one is King of Tokyo. Now King of Tokyo is a more of a kind of chaotic game where you're rolling dice trying to knock monsters out of the city of Tokyo, and you're trying to roll different symbols and fight them and collect cards to power up and stuff like that. It has your more kind of Yahtzee style feel, but again a good one for players of say 4 or 5 players if you're looking for that kind of player count. But it's pretty simple and a bit more obviously conflicts driven, but still very accessible, and I'm sure kids will really enjoy this one. The next one is good for really younger children, probably going down to about 5 or plus. This is King Domino. Now King Domino, as the name suggests, is pretty much a variation of dominoes. As a bit like Carcassonne, you've got all these different kind of terrain types, and you're building this little, I think it's a 9x9 grid, and are basically trying to connect all these different landscapes together, all the different terrain types together to score as many points as you can. A little bit puzzly, but again, really accessible, and it's just dominoes really, but with different landscapes. It looks very pretty and better for those younger children. The next one is Love Letter. Now, Love Letter is what we call a filler game. It's a game that you're going to play in between bigger, more complex games, basically to bridge the time. It's a game where you have a hand of cards and you are basically playing those cards to try and seek out this love letter, and if you find the love letter you win, or if you kind of knock somebody out of the game who has the love letter, you'll win as well. It's a very quick game. It only takes about 10 minutes to play. You have a hand of 2 cards and you're playing them one at a time, trying to seek out that love letter. Very quick. It's this kind of genre of games really blew up probably about 4 or 5 years ago. We call them micro games because there's only a very few components to them, and easy, very transportable. You can carry it around. Not too much strategy in this one. In fact, there's no real strategy, but it's still pretty fun and breezy, and a lot of people can enjoy it. The next kind of category I wanted to talk about was kind of a step higher than family games. I've called these family plus games. These games are still very, they're very unthreatening, but there still has a bit more thinkiness that goes into them, and these ones have really hit the big time. The first one is Azul. Now, Azul is a pretty weird looking game. It's made up of all these kind of plastic acrylic tiles. They're made to look like these mosaic tiles, and you are basically drafting a bunch of these tiles into your hand, and you are putting them on your own player board. But basically, all the colours that you don't choose go into this central reservation or kind of central holding area, and basically players can then start taking from that area. But the thing about this game is that you can really be a bit nasty with it, and you can kind of leave people with tiles they don't want to take, because all the tiles that you kind of can't put on your player board at the end score you quite a heavy amount of negative points. Has a bit of thinkiness into it, a bit of guile and a bit of trickery to really play well. But again, it's really blown up, and there's very few people I know who don't speak of this one highly. Personally, it's not one that I really enjoy, but I must be the vast minority, because it is just blown up huge. There's different versions of this now, but I'm kind of referring to the original one, and it's very very popular, and I'm sure you'll have it recommended to you. So if you want something a bit more a bit more thinky, a bit more clean, and a lot more information available at your hands, this one is a good one. Next we have Splendor. Now, Splendor was a game that blew up probably about, again, 4 or 5 years ago. It's what we call an engine building game. In this one, you are collecting poker chips into your hand, and then you're cashing those poker chips in to buy cards, and then those cards not only give you points, but they give you discounts on future cards to buy. And that's basically how you're going to go. You're going to keep buying cards to get things cheaper and cheaper, and you really get this engine building, and you get faster and faster, and it's basically a race to get to a certain amount of points. Again, this one is very fun. It's going to satisfy, again, more experienced gamers, but still be not too overwhelming for new gamers. And it's really a game you can sink your teeth into and get better and better at. And I think this one's got a lot of plays in it if you want a game that you can keep going back to. I think it's a really solid game, and it gets my recommendation. And the next one is Sagrada. Sagrada is what we call a dice drafting game, as you're picking up these different coloured, beautiful translucent dice, putting them on your player board, which represents a stained glass window, and you are basically doing a little Sudoku puzzle, basically, where you're not allowed to match up different or identical coloured dice or identical kind of dice with the same pip value in orthogonal directions, and you're trying to score different scoring cards as well while doing so. Very pretty game, and one that really can, I think, reach the appeal of that mass market. And the next one is Catan. Now, Catan is a game that's been around for a long time. You'll see this in a lot of bookstores, and personally, I think this game's a bit dated. It's a game where you are basically rolling dice, trying to collect different resources to build roads and stuff. It's a negotiation style game as well. I would personally avoid this one. I think there's a lot of games that do what Catan does better than Catan. It's got a pretty dry look to it as well, but it does have a hardcore following, and people do really like it. So, I'm speaking for myself here, but I think the ship has kind of sailed for Catan personally, and I would recommend giving something else a try. Next, we've got co-op games. So obviously people really like playing cooperative games where you're working together rather than against each other. And the one that really strikes out amongst all others is Pandemic. Now, Pandemic is a game which is quite suitable for this time time period. where you are working together to try and eradicate all these different diseases by playing cards and using actions to clean up these disease cubes around the map. As I said, it's a game you're working together, and this one has really, it's blown up massively. There are so many different spin-offs to this game of different kind of places in the world, and there's dice games, and there's legacy games where you kind of change the game as you go along. But the base game Pandemic is the one that you're probably going to see pop up on your radar first. And just because this one's blown up massively, this doesn't mean that this is, an unsatisfactory game. It is a really solid game, and one that even the most saltiest and most experienced gamers really do appreciate. A lot of cooperative games now do steal a lot of the ideas and mechanisms from Pandemic. So Pandemic really is the kind of forefather of cooperative gaming, and one that holds up tremendously even today. It's 10 years old now, and I'll still happily play this anytime, and it's just a really good fun game where you're working together, and it's got a cool idea as well. The next one is Mysterium. Mysterium is a bit like Dixit, if you remember what I mentioned earlier, where you're playing all these different strange cards, but this one you're working together to do so, and trying to give clue cards to your teammates to try and identify their killer. Basically, you're looking for a weapon, a place, and a person who's committed this murder. But the person giving the clues has got to basically silently give these clues. You can't communicate to his teammates. It's really cool. It's a bit more drawn out and a bit more fiddly than Dixit, so I would always recommend Dixit over this one. But if you really are adamant on working together rather than against each other, then give Mysterium a try, and it looks beautiful as well. Another game is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Again, this one you're going to see all the time in bookstores and stuff. This one is, I suppose it's less of a board game and more of an activity where you are trying to solve a murder mystery together by reading this kind of activity book, looking through this kind of fake London directory, traveling around, talking to people, trying to find clues to work out who's ultimately committed this crime. This one's a really good one if you are kind of adults or if you want to kind of have an evening activity with your significant other or something. A really nice activity. It's very relaxing, but still very thought-provoking, and it's pretty difficult as well. But if you don't put too much pressure on yourself and just enjoy the process of trying to kind of unravel this mystery, then Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a really great game, and one that, again, I still really enjoy to this day and would play at any time. Now, on the polar opposite of those cooperative games, I know some players really like the kind of high, tense, kind of conflict-driven board games that they're used to when they're a kid. They like that ferocious, back and forth of games like Monopoly and stuff like that, which I'm not going to go into. But there are some really, really good games now that that do have that conflict kind of feel to it that you really want, mainly amongst younger adults. One of the ones that is going to be recommended to you if you go into a bookstore is Munchkin. Now, personally, I would avoid this game at all costs. Munchkin is, in my opinion, a terrible game, and that's not my opinion alone. Everyone I've played it with has not really enjoyed it. It's very convoluted. It's a silly, chaotic game that just has no real meaningful decisions in it. So just ignore Munchkin at all costs. That one is going to pop up on your radar though. Risk as well is going to pop up. Again, this is a game that goes back, I think, nearly 100 years, and it's basically a dice rolling game where you're trying to conquer the world. You probably heard of it. Again, very dated. Don't play it. There are so many games now that do what Risk does a lot better, a lot quicker, more fun, and look better as well. And one of those games that I'm going to highly recommend in this kind of genre or category of games, and one that is going to be recommended to you, is Blood Rage. Now, Blood Rage is a gorgeous production game about controlling these different Viking clans on this kind of on this map, and as you play, the map is going to get kind of smaller and smaller as comets or Ragnarok strikes these different regions. You are going to trying to build up your stats and control these different regions to get points. It's a really good game with amazing miniatures. It's not too heavy on the rules front, but it still has a lot of meaningful decisions and strategy paths you can go down. You do that by collecting different cards and building up your tribe to be a bit more unique than other players. And it's just a beautiful production. It plays in about an hour to an hour and a half, so it's not too overwhelming. And again, this one's gets huge acclaim from newer board gamers to the saltiest of board gamers, and it's a lot of fun. And I think you can play up to 4 players with the base game, and you can take that up to 5 players if you get the expansion as well. A bit more expensive than most of your kind of games you're going to be looking at on this list, but it's worth it because the production value is so high. The next one is party games, and party games are obviously good for parties, but when you get a lot of people together, you're looking for those higher player counts when you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 players all want to play the same game at once. And I'm only going to be talking about one game here, and that's because one game alone has really kind of smashed that glass ceiling and just sold. I think this one's in the millions now in terms of copies this one's sold. This is Codenames. Now, Codenames is a team versus team style game where you are going to be, we're going to have a clue giver who's going to be kind of trying to give clues to his teammates based on this grid of cards, and they're trying to make them locate certain cards and avoid other cards, because you can be giving team points to your counter team, or you can be or you can accidentally locate a spy card, which is ultimately going to lose you the game instantly. It's a really fun game, one that's just blown up massively. There are tons of different spin-offs to this one. If you don't want the basic word version, you can get a picture version. If you don't have the picture version, you can get a Marvel version or a Harry Potter version or The Simpsons or Disney. So with all these different kind of intellectual properties, you can probably find something that's going to appeal to you. But it's a very clever game where you've got to think of clues that link all different words together to try and beat your team or beat the opposite team to locate your words as quickly as possible. So yeah, it's a good game. Again, still that I'll play to this day. And also, if you don't want the kind of bigger version of it where you're playing a team versus team, you can actually play a cooperative version of this one called Codenames Duet, where you're working together with your partner to find those words. So the next kind of category I'm going to be looking at is story-driven games. Now, in board gaming, we tend to have two kind of overseeing genres of games or types of games. One is kind of what we call Euro games, which focuses on strategy and the game mechanisms and stuff like that. And the next one is what we call Ameritrash games, which is more story-driven, games that you're going to get, emotionally invested in, where you're going to have twists and turns and, just text and narrative and stuff like that. And these games are very popular. And a couple of the ones that are going to get recommended to you or pop up first are Dead of Winter. Now, Dead of Winter is a game set in, you're basically a bunker of people who are sheltering from not only the harsh weather conditions, because it's set in a complete blizzard, but also you're going to be hiding from zombies as well. And the idea of this game is that you are basically working together to fulfill these different objectives, as well as your own personal objective, by traveling around to all these different locations, collecting different equipment and stuff. The story really comes into play because you've got all this different cast of characters, and they interact with each other in kind of clever ways. Using this card system where if you perform certain actions, you'll read a bit of text, and then you might have to make hard decisions on the back of that text. But the game also has this very cool mechanism in it where one of the players might be a traitor. And throughout the game, you're going to be trying to work out who the traitor is, if there is one at all. And the traitor is obviously going to be trying to lose the game for the other players. Again, a lot of drama in this one. Game-wise, it's not quite my cup of tea, but I can certainly see the appeal of it. And it's a really cool theme and a cool idea, and one that works pretty damn well. The next one is Betrayal at House on the Hill. This one is another hidden kind of traitor game. And this one has a huge book full of all these different scenarios which are going to trigger as you start the game. It's a tile placement game as you're kind of building up this mansion, traveling around, and at a certain point in the game, one player is going to be kind of rooted out as the betrayer, and then the scenario is going to turn on its head, and you're going to have to work together to beat that traitor, and the traitor is going to have to try and do something to beat you. Loads of different things you can do this one. I won't spoil all the different stories and stuff, but you'll be surprised at what you can do. It's a lot of dice rolling, and so in terms of wanting to be meticulous in what you do and strategy and stuff, this one isn't going to be that kind of game. But if you want games that you can have laugh out loud moments with your friends and stories to tell down for years to come, then Betrayal on the House on the Hill is going to be a good fit. Now I'm going to talk about some strategy games now. So these are games that you want to think about if you do want something or want a few kind of more meat on the bones to your games, not just a more kind of a kid-friendly, whimsical feel to it. These ones you're going to have to think about your moves a bit more in advance. So for my light strategy games, this one is no doubt going to pop up on your radar. This is Lords of Waterdeep. Now, Lords of Waterdeep is a Dungeons and Dragons themed game, but don't hold that against it. I think that's very much, is a very light meshing of the two. You don't need to know anything about Dungeons and Dragons to play or enjoy this game, but it's a worker placement game. And if you know anything about board gaming, worker placement is one of the most popular mechanisms out there. It's one of the mechanisms that got me hooked on board gaming and gets a lot of other people hooked on board gaming, where you have a bunch of your player pawns, but you are using these player pawns to claim different regions on the board to get that action and basically shut other people out from using those actions. It's a mechanism that's really kind of new to players who don't play modern board gaming, but when you do play it, you'll really kind of pique your interest and keep you coming back for more. But this one is a very accessible game where you're trying to collect these different cubes representing different kind of heroes and adventurers, and then cash them in to score points, basically. Basically representing different missions you're completing. But in the game, you can kind of acquire buildings, which give you kind of more powerful abilities, and when other people use them, you get rewards as well. It flows very nicely, very accessible. Again, still bridges that gap between being accessible but still being engaging enough to be satisfying. A really good game, and one that most people suggest as a top gateway game. Games to get people into the hobby. The next one is a game that blew up massively last year. This was hands down the game of the year on almost every kind of award given. This one is Wingspan. Now, Wingspan is it does a great job of being a great game itself, but also being so accessible and so widely appealing because the game is beautiful to look at. The production values are out of this world good. The theme is obviously about collecting birds and making these different aviaries. The artwork on the cards is stunning, but it's all not just a veneer. The game itself is actually really good as you are acquiring these different bird cards, putting them onto your player boards, and basically it's what we call an engine building game where you are as you build up more and more cards, you can trigger those cards and get more and more rewards in return. And you're trying to get those or use those birds to fulfill public objectives, but also get eggs, which are going to get you bonus points and lots of different things like that. Gorgeous game, one that's completely smashed expectations, and the hype train for this one was massive. But again, I think this is a good, it's done a great job of bringing new people into the hobby because when you talk about games like Lords of Waterdeep, you're not going to get a lot of people who are interested in that who aren't geeks. But Wingspan does a great job of bringing, in parents or grandparents or girlfriends into this world, and you can enjoy this game together because, again, the game is still really good, but the theme is so appealing. And it's a good game itself. So that's Wingspan, one that I really recommend, and I think it's done a great job of advocating the hobby. The next one is Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders, the hype has died down a bit now, but it's what we call a drafting game. And drafting games are great because you can play with a lot of players at the same time. I think this one plays up to 7, and the reason it goes so quickly when you're playing with more players is because people are playing simultaneously, and you're basically collecting cards into your hand, building this own little kind of, almost like a little civilization, or building like a monument, and scoring points in lots of different ways. A really cool game, and again, a bit like Carcassonne. If you're a bit of one out on the base game, you can really amp up the complexity by adding expansions into the game. But again, one that works really well at higher player counts, whereas Wingspan and Lords of Waterdeep work well at pretty much all the player counts, because Waterdeep works really well at 2 players all the way up to, I think, 5 or 6 with the expansion, but I personally wouldn't play that high. And Wingspan is, I think it plays 2 to 5, but again, it works really well at most of those player counts. Medium strategy games, so these are slightly a step above. One is Scythe. Now, Scythe is, again, another gorgeous production, actually made by the same company as Wingspan. This one is an area control style game and an engine building game, as you are have these huge machines, and you are basically traveling and spreading across this map, trying to collect different resources. build these mechs, build these different buildings to claim objectives. I won't go too much into detail in this one, but again, it looks ultra cool, the artwork is great, and a really solid game at that, and no doubt is going to be recommended to you before you know it. And the next one is Castles of Burgundy. This one is hugely regarded as a great game, but if you aren't so bothered about looking great, or if you are obsessed about looking great, this one isn't probably going to be for you. It's a very bland looking game, but don't let that fool you on this, making you think this is a bland game, because the game is actually fantastic. It's really fun, a really puzzly style game as you are rolling dice, collecting tiles, placing those tiles on your own little board, trying to make this little French city or French province, trying to get lots of endgame objectives, scoring points in loads of different ways. Just a fantastic game that's designed very meticulously and has a lot of strategy in it while still having tactical decisions as well. And it's just really fun without being overwhelming. So Castles of Burgundy gets a huge recommendation from me, and it is my kind of game. And obviously, some people are going to want to dive straight into the real heavy advanced strategy games. I personally wouldn't recommend it. I would really kind of drip feed yourself into these style of games, because you're going to have a lot of things that are just alien to you, and digesting them all at once could be a bit of a problem. But some games, well, one of the games it's #1 rated on Board Game Geek, which is kind of the biggest database of board games, is Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is a huge box, extremely expensive. It's about £100 or I don't know, $100 plus. It comes in a box about this big and has thousands of components in it. It's basically a dungeon crawler style game. It's a card-driven game as you are trying to play your cards to navigate yourself way through a different scenario. You can level up your characters and stuff like that. There's loads of different monsters, loads of different scenarios, loads of characters you can play. Again, I would say avoid this until you're very comfortable with board gaming in general, because it is so overwhelming, and I think you're probably going to kind of almost put yourself off because there's just too much to digest at once. So that is Gloomhaven. And some other games as well. Terraforming Mars is a very popular one. Again, another engine building style game if you like the sci-fi theme. But again, I would still recommend playing something a bit lighter before you dip your toe into that style of gaming. So that kind of concludes my video really. I hope this has kind of given you a bit of an idea about what to expect from these games. Luckily, our kind of mainstream, or obviously not the traditional games, but the ones just outside those traditional games do a great job of bringing people into the hobby. And most of these games really do a good job of that. I would recommend most of them. I think you're going to get a lot of fun out of all of them, depending on your needs. Obviously, they're all for different player counts, all for different kind of levels you want to play at. If you want to play something very light and breezy, or if you want to play, burn your brain and play something more advanced. But it really is a great hobby, and I hope you give it some time and get into it, because I really am a true believer that there is a board game out there for everybody, because you can, every genre, every idea, every IP, every kind of, any theme you can think of, there is a board game for it. And again, I'm sure there's something out there for you. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Again, I hope it's been some use to you. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. You can also support me by following me on Instagram or backing me on Patreon. And I'll leave those links below for those different sites. So for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.